welcome to my Made by Lucy sewing channel, and today I'm going to show you how to make this rather fun little zipper pouch. This one I made out of an oilcloth fabric. It was a little bit left over from a workshop I done in my studio here, and I really liked this gorgeous fabric, and I thought I would make it into just a really simple little zipper pouch, which I'm going to share with you how to make today. Of course, you can follow this tutorial using oilcloth, or if you don't fancy sewing with oilcloth, you can follow this exact tutorial to make one of these out of a woven fabric, a cotton fabric, denim, anything that you've got to hand really. Here's what you're going to need. So this little pouch that I'm making today is going to be using a 6-inch zipper. You can use any size zip that you want, and you'll just adjust your pattern to fit your zip. So I've just got a closed end 6-inch zipper that I'm going to be using. I've also got my oilcloth that I'm going to be using for the outer of my bag. So I've got this pretty one here. This is like a PVC oilcloth fabric. And how I've measured this is I've cut my fabric the size of my zip, as you can see. And then the depth of my pouch, I kind of just decided how big I wanted it. So this is about 5.5, 5.75 even, I think it is, inches deep. So my overall bag would be just over 5 inches deep. But you can do any size you wish. And if you used a bigger zip, you would just cut your fabric to the size of your zip width-wise, and then just adjust your depth as well to suit sort of, you can kind of see by eye how big you feel it should be, and you know how pleasing that looks to eye as well. And then I've chose some cotton lining for my little bag, because this bag is fully lined as well. So I've just chose this funky blue that I had in my stash, so what I had left over from another project. That's just a cotton fabric I'm using. I've cut it exactly the same size as my oilcloth. So I've got 2 outer and 2 lining pieces, my zip, and then you need some coordinating thread in your sewing machine, a full sewing bobbin, and you need to have a think if you're using oilcloth or PVC, what sewing machine foot you're going to use. There's a couple of choices. You could use a walking foot to help you sew over there. You could use a Teflon foot, which is like this sort of plasticky one. Or if you haven't got one of those, you can use your standard sewing machine foot. The only time that we're going to be sewing directly onto the oilcloth is when we do the top stitch here. And a little trick for that, you can use baking paper, tracing paper of some sort over your oilcloth and sew across it, and that stops it from sticking. So I'll show you how to do that as well. So let's get started. Here's what you're going to need to do first. You need to get one of your pieces of outer fabric, so your oilcloth or alternative fabric that you might be using, and you need to grab your zip. Now you need to make sure your zip is in working order first before you apply it. And you want to apply your zip face down onto your fabric. So you can see there's my zipper pull, and I'm going to face that down onto the right side of my fabric, so the pretty side of my fabric. And I'm going to line up the 2 top edges, so the top of my zip to the top of my fabric. So inside I've got the right side of my fabric and the right side of my zip faced together. So lining up those top 2 edges, I'm going to now just clip that in place. You also want to think here when you're doing this part, what way you want your zip to open. So whatever way you want your zip to open, whether that be left to right, right to left, or whatever, just lay your zipper pull on the right side for whatever you prefer. I'm going to clip that on the top like that. So my zip now is clipped to the top. Then I'm going to get one of my lining pieces of fabric, and I'm going to lay that on top of that, what I've just done, face down again. So the right side of my lining fabric and the right way up, I'm going to lay on top of that. So I've now got my zip in the middle of my outer and my lining fabric, and I'm just going to move those clips that I've put on to catch all 3 layers. So just to let you see that, that's the reverse of my lining fabric. So inside I've got the right side of my lining, my zip, and then my outer fabric. All the right sides are facing. And then I'm really simply going to sew the zip on along that top edge using my zipper foot on my sewing machine. So just my standard zipper foot. I don't need to worry about the oilcloth at this point, because there is no oilcloth showing on here that's going to be sticking to my machine. So just my standard sewing zipper foot. I've got white thread in here. You're not going to see this thread at this point. So I've just got a standard straight stitch, a standard length for my straight stitch as well at the moment. You can, if you find that your sewing machine is struggling with the oilcloth, if that's what you're using, you can extend your stitch length up a notch if you want to make it sew a bit easier. You want to do a back stitch when you start and a back stitch when you finish. Now when you're using a zipper foot, if you haven't done that before, when you put your fabric underneath that zipper foot, your zipper foot should neatly sit along the teeth of your zip here. So making it really snug against the teeth, and that's how you get it nice and close, you're stitching to those teeth as you sew. Okay, so I'm just going to sew my zip on now. So I'm sitting my zip underneath that zipper foot. My needle's coming down on the left hand side of my zipper foot, and the teeth of my zip are on the left hand side as well. So if I run my finger along, I can feel those teeth, and my zipper foot needs to sit in snugly next to those teeth so that I'm sewing fairly close to the edge of my zip. And then I'm going to do a little back stitch when I start, and I'm going to sew all the way down and do a back stitch when I finish. Get to my zipper pull, which you can see is a lumpy bit here, I just want to make sure my needle is down in my fabric, and then I want to move that zipper pull out the way. So I'm just going to open my fabrics up, grab hold of that zipper pull and wiggle it out the way, wiggle it at the back there. If you don't do that, as you sew past it, the zipper foot on your machine will be pushed out and you won't have a nice straight line. That's one side done, that's sewn on. So if you look inside, you can now see there is my zip attached. So now I want to do the same to the other side. So I want to now reveal my zip again. So I want to open my bag up and reveal my zip. Keep these two bits of fabric down out the way. And then exactly the same again, I'm going to get my piece of outer fabric. I'm going to lay my zip right side down onto that fabric, making sure it's lined up down these two side edges to make sure it's nice and straight. And lining the top of the zip up with the top of my fabric, and then I'm going to pop my lining fabric face down again on top of all of that, lining all those top raw edges up, pop some clips, and then sew that second side of the zip on again, exactly the same. So it's the second side now pinned in place. All the fabrics that I've already sewn are down here out the way, all in between. So my lining, the wrong side of my lining is facing me, and the wrong side of my other outer fabric. And I'm going to sew down that zip again. And when I get to that zipper pull, I just want to open my bag up, find the zipper pull and wiggle it out the way. That can be a bit tricky, but just give it a good wiggle and it should move out the way. So that's the second side now done. So if I open this bag up, I should have my zip in the middle here, and I should have my two outer fabrics either side, my zip the right way up, and on the reverse I should have the right sides of my lining fabric showing and my zip in the middle. So the next stage that we want to do is we want to hold these fabrics down away from our zip so that when we're opening and closing, these fabrics aren't going to get caught up into that zipper mechanism. So you don't want to iron if you're using oilcloth because it's not great. You obviously don't want to touch the actual shiny side with the iron. You could do a really light iron on the opposite side, on the reverse here, but try not to really. Make sure your fabrics are ironed, your cotton fabrics are ironed before you start. If you're using cottons, you can give them a good press now, just avoiding the teeth on your zip if you're using a plastic zip. And next what we want to do is do a top stitch either side of our zip, holding these fabrics nice and flat. So I'm going to do that using my Teflon foot to help me sew along my oilcloth. So I'm going to be sewing on this side of my bag, holding that down out the way. It's always wise to sew on the side that you're going to actually see, because that's the side that you're watching when you're sewing. So that's going to be your neatest side. So this is my Teflon foot, but if you haven't got a Teflon foot, here's what you can do. If you're using oilcloth and you want to sew on the shiny side, you can get yourself a bit of tracing paper, baking paper, something thin, tissue paper. Just lay that on top of what you're sewing. Just gonna put my normal foot back on. So you lay that on top of the piece of oilcloth that you're going to sew, and then you literally sew exactly where you would, but on top of the tissue paper or tracing paper, whatever you're using, instead of actually directly onto the oilcloth. And as you can see, it slides through beautifully. I didn't have to help that at all. And if I sew directly onto the oilcloth, if I show you, it gets stuck. It's not even moving there. I'd have to sort of push it through. It's just getting stuck on my sewing machine foot. So the tissue paper really, really helps it move through the machine beautifully. And then once you've done it, you literally just tear that tissue paper away, and that will just reveal your stitches. So just do it gently, but it should just tear away. And that's why you want to use tissue paper or tracing paper or something as opposed to normal paper. There you go. And then you've got your row of stitches. So there's a little trick to help you if you haven't got a Teflon foot or a walking foot that you can use to sew oilcloth. So I'm just going to sew down now either side of my zip, making sure my lining fabric underneath is pulled out nice and neatly and sort of flat away from my zip. And I'm just going to follow down the edge of my zip here along this top edge, probably about 1/2 centimetre away from the top of the folded fabric where my zip is. Again, when you get to your zip, you want to pull that zipper pull out the way. As you can see here, I'm not using my zipper foot now. I'm using, my ordinary, this is my Teflon foot, because you don't need that now. You don't need to get so close to the teeth. So that's one side done. There we go. So I've now sewn down both sides of my zipper, holding those fabrics nice and flat away from my zip on the front and on the back. You can see that there. And that's just going to stop it from getting caught in the zip as I use my little pouch. And now we're ready to sew the whole pouch together. So I'm going to open my zip up a little bit so that I can turn it in the right way when I'm finished. And I'm going to pull up my 2 outer fabrics right sides facing and my 2 lining fabrics right side facing at the bottom. And that'll give you sort of a little H shape, almost a skinny H. You want to line these fabrics up, and you want to make sure your zip, the teeth of your zip is pushed down into your lining fabric. So you don't want those teeth of the zip to be pushing up into your outer fabric. You want them down out the way. That's really important to make it look nice and neat. And I'm going to use clips because I'm using oilcloth, but you can use pins if you've got all fabric, woven fabrics. Cutting off all my threads. So I'm just going to pin or clip my 2 sides first, pushing those zipper teeth down into my lining fabrics, and then I'm going to line up the rest of my pouch. Give it a little trim if you need to, and I'm just going to put a few clips around to hold it in place. The oilcloth kind of holds itself because it sticks together when you've got those 2 right sides facing. So at this point now you don't need to use your Teflon foot or the tracing paper again, because we're sewing on the fabric side of the oilcloth now. So it's not going to stick to our machine. We've got no oilcloth showing. So the only bit we've needed a special technique or foot for is just doing that top stitch along the zipper. So I'm going to keep mine on because it's on there, but you can change it back now. And we're going to sew all the way around our pouch now, leaving a gap at the bottom in the lining somewhere. We want to leave about a 2-inch gap to make sure we could turn that in the right way, particularly if you're using oilcloth, because it's quite a thick and firm fabric to turn in. So make sure you've got a big enough gap at the bottom. So I'm going to start sewing here. I'm going to go all the way around my pouch and I'm going to finish here, leaving my gap in the middle. You want to sew straight over your zip at either end. And what you also want to make sure is that you're sewing in, don't leave too big a gap from the end of the zip stopper. So this little stopper here, I want to sew just outside of that. So I'm going to sew a good sort of 5/8 seam allowance all the way around my bag. So I've sewn all the way around my pouch now, leaving that gap at the bottom. I'm just going to give it a good trim. So trim off some of that seam allowance now, and I'm going to trim the angles at the corners as well to take the points away and take some of the bulk away. I'm just going to trim off the points at each corner. And at the corners where the zips are as well, I'm just going to snip in a bit closer to that seam line just to take away as much bulk as I can from that point. So I'm just going to snip out like a little triangle almost where my zip is, because it's particularly thick at that point, and particularly if you're using oilcloth, even thicker. So I've just taken some little notches in where my zip is, just to take some more bulk off. And then my opening here, I'm now really simply going to turn it in the right way. So I'm now going to turn my pouch in the right way and see what it looks like. I've got my zip open inside, remember, so that I can turn it all the way through that zip opening, all the way out through that bottom edge. So this is when you realise that you need to make your opening big enough to get all of that through easily. Oilcloth can be a bit tricky because it sort of sticks and it's quite firm, but it will come through. There we go. And once you've got it all through, you just want to put your hands in that opening and push your corners out now. So find those corners, push them out as best as you can. You can use a chopstick or something to help you push them out. I wouldn't recommend using your scissors because you might poke a hole through. And then you want to push your lining in. Push out those top corners as well where your zip is. Gently push them up. There we are, looking good. So the last thing to do when you're happy with all of that, once you've got your corners and everything pushed out and you're happy how it looks, you just want to close up the opening in the lining. So pull the lining out, tuck that that opening under. You can either pop a few stitches across with the sewing machine, which is what I'm going to do, or you could do a little slip stitch there to cover it up by hand as well. Entirely up to you. You're not going to particularly see it at the bottom of your bag, but it's up to you. So I'm just going to pop a little row of straight stitch across there just to seal that opening up. If I'm sewing by machine, I normally tend to sew all the way along the bottom of my bag because then when it lays in the bottom, along the bottom of the lining, because then when it lays in the bottom of the bag, it sort of is all nice and equal down there, all nice and level. And that is it. There you have one rather cute little handy zipper pouch, fully lined, ta-da, ready to use. So I hope you enjoyed that little tutorial. Come back and see some more soon, and remember to subscribe to my channel to see when I'm uploading new tutorials to follow along and join in with me. Thank you, bye.